Will there be peace in the Middle East? Hardly without a paradigm shift. The first part of the three-part edition of the audiobook. Section 0, The Basics. Foreword, historical overview without the claim of completeness. This audiobook is supported by factual sources, but the main idea is that before anyone wishes to argue on the subject, they should conduct their own research and exploratory work to be able to participate in any dialogue in an informed and unbiased manner. Both Israel and Hamas and other Palestinian factions have a long and bloody history in light of attacks and counterattacks, which complicates the identification of the first aggressor. The establishment of Israel in 1948 led to a multi-front conflict with surrounding Arab states and Palestinian groups, with the country and its citizens fighting for survival and occupying strategic areas. The situation is complicated as radicalized factions on both sides provide new pretexts for retaliation to the adversary, fueled by revenge, leading to more insane terrorist acts, pogroms, and bloody atrocities, while the moderate majority suffers the most on both sides. An observer errs if they assess the situation merely as a religious origin conflict. In reality, it is neither religiously motivated nor conflictual in nature. Although religion has significant importance, the main direction should be sought in political reasons, with a heavy emphasis on geopolitical details. Some argue that labeling the situation as a conflict misrepresents reality. They believe that the term conflict suggests equal or mutual aggression between the two parties, which, in their view, does not adequately describe the situation, especially from a Palestinian perspective, as mostly asymmetric warfare is ongoing. Due to the large power differential, the weaker side tends to resort to unusual, often ruthless tactics, particularly when the feeling of oppression is strong, considering the regularly thwarted international and legal processes and the personal and social tragedies rooted in ongoing violence. Certain groups have strong views that what is happening is not a conflict, but an occupation. They emphasize Israel's military occupation over Palestinian territories and the systemic human rights abuses suffered by Palestinians. They consider the use of the term occupation to be a more accurate description concerning the historical and ongoing control and displacement of Palestinians. When considering the anticipated impacts of the desired peace in the Middle East, it's important to mention that this region is, in many ways, a microcosm of the world. In this small area, multiple cultures, religions, and nations meet, which often clashed with each other due to long-standing tensions and conflicts. If a lasting and fair peace could be achieved in the Middle East, it could serve as a significant example for other hostile regions of the world. Creating a culture of harmony and mutual respect in the Middle East could demonstrate that, despite deep-rooted hostility and disagreements, it's possible to find cooperative and peace-seeking solutions. Such an example could provide inspiration to other conflict zones, showing that through dialogue, empathy, and striving towards common goals, progress can be made even in the most difficult situations, following the footsteps of the achievements in South Africa and Northern Ireland. Peace in the Middle East could accelerate the formation of global community harmony and cooperation, laying the foundation for a truly global, intertwined, and mutually supportive community. A community that rejects settling any future disagreements with a medieval mentality through warfare. Some historical facts important for understanding the context. The Red Scare and its precursors. The Red Scare or Red Terror, which appeared in the United States in two waves in the early and mid-20th century, reflects deep concerns and paranoia within American society regarding communist infiltration and subversion. The first wave began after the 1917 Russian Revolution and lasted until the early 1920s, while the second, perhaps more known wave, started in the late 1940s and lasted until the mid-1950s, with McCarthyism being influential in American political circles. Nowadays, it seems to rekindle similarly as the conservative and capitalist momentum wanes. This always appeared to be a good idea to the heavyweights of world politics. Cold War and the impact of Red Scare on U.S. foreign policy. During the Cold War, which started post-World War II and lasted until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the Red Scare and the perception of the communist threat significantly influenced U.S. foreign policy, including its policy in the Middle East. U.S.-Israel strategic partnership. A strategic priority for the United States was to limit the expansion of Soviet influence and support countries resisting communist expansion. Israel, established in 1948 and facing hostility from Arab countries from the outset, emerged as a strategic partner that could be supported by the United States in this context. Additional factors and Middle Eastern policy. Although the Red Scare and the general fear of communism strongly influenced the U.S. foreign policy decisions during the Cold War, its Middle East policy was much more complex, and several other factors such as oil, religious and cultural ties, and the political influence of the Israeli-American diaspora played roles. World politics have changed significantly since the end of the Cold War, but the political decisions of the United States and other countries continue to be influenced by past events and historical memory. Zionist terrorism. It's worth mentioning terrorist acts committed by Zionist paramilitary forces, which caused many headaches for the British in the early period, including the attack on the King David Hotel carried out by Ergun in 1946. Many directly associate the establishment of the State of Israel with these early terrorist acts. Peace negotiation processes and rejections. Early peace processes. Camp David Accords, from 1978, led to a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, laid the foundation for Palestinian autonomy. Most Palestinian factions rejected it, as it did not explicitly recognize a Palestinian state. Madrid Conference, from 1991, the first attempt to initiate peace negotiations after the Gulf War. Although it paved the way for future negotiations, no substantial agreements were made. Oslo era. Oslo Accords, from 1993 and 1995, a significant step towards peace, established the Palestinian Authority and provided them with limited self-governance. Some factions from both Israel and Palestine rejected the accords. Further initiatives. Camp David Summit, from 2000, and Taba Summit, from 2001. The latter tried to salvage peace after the failed Camp David Summit, but the negotiations ended without an agreement. Annapolis Conference, from 2007, attempted to achieve a two-state solution by the end of 2008. Though progress was made, no final agreement was reached. There are debates over whether some peace proposals were made with good intentions. Critics argue that certain proposals were designed to be rejected, thus making the other side appear unwilling to negotiate in public opinion. Among those working or inclined towards Israeli-Palestinian peace, several have fallen victim to assassination, and some of these could have represented significant steps forward in the peace process. A significant example of this is Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who was killed in 1995 by a Jewish extremist because Rabin signed the Oslo Accords and committed himself towards moving in the direction of Palestinian autonomy. The assassination deeply divided Israel's domestic politics and stalled the peace process. Ahmed Jabari, the leader of Hamas's military wing, was killed by Israeli forces in 2012 while trying to finalize a long-term ceasefire. His assassination marked the beginning of a week-long series of attacks in Gaza, during which more than 100 Palestinian civilians lost their lives. Raid al-Karmi, a militant leader of the Fatah party, was killed by Israeli forces in 2002 after all Palestinian militant groups had agreed to a ceasefire, which this event interrupted. Mahmoud Abu Hanoud, a high-ranking Hamas militant, was killed by Israeli forces in 2001. At that time, Hamas adhered to the agreement not to attack targets within Israel. Khalid Meshal, the chairman of Hamas's political bureau, was the target of an Israeli assassination attempt in 1997, although the attempt failed. On some occasions, Meshal indicated that he would be willing to make peace under certain conditions. After Hamas's electoral victory, he said that his group was ready to negotiate a fair peace with Israel. In contrast, he did not give up violence, which greatly limited further peace talks. Mentionable events that further fueled passions and extreme shifts on both sides and caused disturbance in the local and global societies. 1936 to 1939. The Arab Revolt. In 1936, an Arab National Committee called on the Palestinians for a general strike, tax refusal, and boycott of Jewish products as a protest against British colonial rule and increasing Jewish immigration. The rebellion was brutally suppressed, and during this period several villages were bombed, houses demolished, and mass arrests were carried out. 1948. Nakba. Before the expiration of the British Mandate, even before May 14, 1948, Zionist paramilitary units began a military operation to demolish Palestinian towns and villages to expand the borders of the emerging Zionist state. In April 1948, more than 100 Palestinian men, women, and children were killed in the village of Deir Yassin near Jerusalem. Palestinians experience this as an ongoing process that continues to burden and embitter their daily lives, rather than a one-time event. First Arab-Israeli War, 1948 to 1949. The First Arab-Israeli War began on May 14, 1948, after the end of the British Mandate in Palestine and the Declaration of Independence of Israel. As a result of the fighting, Israel gained control over larger areas than originally allocated to it under the 1947 partition plan, including West Jerusalem. During the battles, about 750,000 Palestinian Arabs fled or were expelled from their homes. Six-Day War, 1967. During the Six-Day War of 1967, Israel seized East Jerusalem, Gaza, the Golan Heights, the Sinai Peninsula, and brought the entire West Bank under its control. Jewish settlements were established in these areas to solidify its rule. Munich Olympics, 1972. At the Munich Olympics, 8 members of the Palestinian terrorist group Black September took the Israeli team hostage, killing 2 athletes on the spot and taking 9 more hostage. The group's leader, Latif Afif, demanded the release of Palestinians held in Israeli prisons and the founders of the Red Army faction held by West Germans. In a failed rescue attempt carried out by German authorities, all 9 hostages were killed, and the Israeli government launched Operation Wrath of God to track down and kill the conspirators. Cave of the Patriarchs Massacre. In 1994, during the holy month of Ramadan, a Jewish extremist, Barak Goldstein, opened fire on Palestinian Muslim worshippers at the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron while they were praying, killing 29 and injuring more than 100 others. Events of the 2000s. Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon's visit to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, stagnation of the peace process, and Israel's control over the West Bank led to the Second Intifada, resulting in heightened tension and violence on both sides. Dolphinarium disco bombing, 2001. The Hamas suicide bomber killed 21 Israelis, mostly teenagers, in a nightclub in Tel Aviv. Passover massacre, 2002. The Hamas suicide bomber killed 30 Israelis during a Passover meal in Netanya. Murder of Shireen Abu Akleh, 2022. Shireen Abu Akleh was a prominent Palestinian-American journalist known for her significant work at Al Jazeera, where she worked for 25 years, was born on April 3, 1971, and tragically lost her life on May 14, 2022, during an Israeli raid near Jenin. Recent investigations point to nearby IDF unit which fired multiple shots, intentionally ending Shireen's life despite her clearly visible press insignia while she was reporting on the events. Huwara, 2023. On February 26, 2023, hundreds of Israeli settlers began violent rampages in Huwara and other Palestinian villages in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, resulting in one civilian death, over 100 Palestinians injured, and significant property damage. Israeli soldiers were in the area during the incident but did not intervene. The attack was described as a pogrom by an Israeli commander and occurred after a Palestinian armed individual earlier on the same day shot multiple rounds at 2 Israeli settlers. In the aftermath, Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, a settler leader, called for Huwara to be swept away by the Israeli army, although he later retracted his remarks after international condemnation. Settler attacks on Palestinian villages, 2023. Israeli security leaders classified a series of settler attacks as nationalist terrorism against Palestinian villages after several attacks occurred within a week, sparking sharp criticism against far-right cabinet ministers. Deadly settler attack, August 5, 2023. A young Palestinian was fatally injured by a group of Israeli settlers. An attack later described as a terrorist attack by the United States Department of State, expressing great concern about escalating violence in the West Bank. The list is practically endless. The above are just excerpts from a multitude of similar events. Throughout history, embarrassingly many documented cases can be attributed to both sides, highlighting that extremist manifestations do not necessarily reflect majority thinking, although a broader receptive ground can be found in both extremist Zionist and extremist Islamic-minded people. The radicalizable national pain. Contemporary Palestinian perspective. For instance, concerning the two-state topic, the contemporary perspective of young Palestinians is important. Doubts have emerged due to previous efforts, as many young Palestinians grew up witnessing peace talks that didn't yield tangible results. This has fostered skepticism about the viability of the two-state solution among rising generations. Increasingly, young Palestinians are tuning into the idea of a one-state solution, where Palestinians and Israelis live in a single, secular, worldly, democratic state. They argue that due to Israeli settler activity, a viable and contiguous Palestinian state is geographically no longer possible. More and more, the issues of rights, equality, and identity are coming to the forefront instead of statehood. Many young Palestinians feel that even if a Palestinian state were to come into being, it wouldn't necessarily guarantee rights or effectively put an end to occupation and oppression. Further momentum for the two-state solution. The two-state solution continues to be widely supported on the international scene. The UN, the European Union, and other major international players continue to support and advocate for this direction. A significant portion of both the Israeli and Palestinian populations, especially the older generations, continue to support the two-state solution. They see it as the best way to ensure national self-determination for both peoples and to address fundamental issues related to Jerusalem, refugees, borders, and security. The question is how much this is in parallel with contemporary Palestinian momentum nowadays. Practical considerations. Implementing a one-state solution poses huge challenges, starting with the questions of the nature of the state, deeply rooted fears to identity, and security-related issues alike. Many see the continuous expansion of Israeli settlers in the West Bank areas and East Jerusalem as undermining the viability of a future Palestinian state. Hamas versus Fatah. Palestinian politics is deeply divided, mainly between Fatah operating in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza. This division complicates any unified negotiation approach. The list below shows the main differences. Ideology. Hamas Islamist. Fatah secular. Israel strategy. Hamas armed resistance. Fatah negotiations. Objective. Hamas does not recognize Israel, but would accept a Palestinian state considering the 1967 borders. Fatah recognizes Israel, would establish a state considering the 1967 borders. Over the years, Israeli politics has shifted far right, with some parties questioning the necessity of a Palestinian state or viewing the West Bank as an integral part of Israel. The upcoming years will be crucial for the fate of the two-state solution. The perspectives of young Palestinians highlight the evolutionary nature of disagreements and underline the necessity of new approaches that address the aspirations and fears of both peoples. While the two-state solution faces significant challenges, all other alternative solutions must also confront the deeply rooted traumatic issues of identity, rights, and security alike. The dialogue shaping the future form of Israel-Palestine relations will undoubtedly continue to evolve and is evolving before our eyes nowadays. Section 1 Fundamentals of Warring. Jus ad bellum, justice of war. These criteria determine when it is just to go to war. Just causes. War is only permitted in case of real and certain danger. Legitimate authority. Only lawfully established public authorities can initiate war. Right intention. The intention must stem from a just cause, not self-aggrandizement or power-grabbing. Probability of success. Do not engage in a war that has no chance of success. Last resort. Every peaceful alternative must be exhausted before parties resort to war. Proportionality. The expected benefits of initiating war must be proportional to the expected damages or harms. Jus in bello, justice in war. These criteria define how to fight after the onset of war. Discrimination or distinction. Combatants should only target other combatants, non-combatants should not be targeted. Proportionality. The force used in war must be proportional to the damages that the war aims to prevent or correct. Prisoners of war and fair treatment. Prisoners must be treated respectfully and humanely. Forbidden malum in se. Inherently evil acts such as sexual violence, pillaging, torture, interrogations, and genocide are prohibited. Jus post bellum, justice after war. This deals with the aftermath of conflict and post-war reconstruction. Proportionality and transparency. The terms of peace should be made public, and the punishment should be proportional in case of any committed crime, Right intention. The intention to create a just peace for all affected parties. Distinction. A distinction should be made between leaders responsible for the war and those who are not. Punishment. War crimes must be addressed, and those responsible for them must be held accountable. Rehabilitation. Efforts must be made to rehabilitate and restore societies after conflict. Important note. It's important to note that the motives behind attacks by Hamas or similar groups can be complex, driven by a mixture of political, ideological, military, and occasionally civilizational factors. In the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the general higher level of militarization in Israel and the presence of many former and reserve soldiers among the civilian population may blur the lines between combatants and non-combatants from the attacker's perspective. It's also important to note that international law clearly distinguishes between combatants and civilians, providing protection for the latter, especially children, the elderly, and the sick. Nothing can therefore excuse the disgraceful and cruel series of attacks committed by Hamas militants on October 7. Extreme ideologies often dehumanize or demonize entire populations, leading to indiscriminate violence against civilians. From a jihadist or extremist perspective, the cultural, religious, or national identity of a population may justify violence against them. However, such viewpoints and actions are widely condemned by the international community, are contrary to international law, and indeed revolt the stomach of the average person. These points perhaps help to understand jihadist, extremist Islamist motivations along with their horrendous consequences, emphatically repeating that this exposition does not seek to excuse them. Hamas's big mistake is thinking that they can have the militant actions they judge justified accepted by the civilized participants of the international community, using the Palestinian population as puppets for this purpose. Although a more conciliatory tone is present, the cycle of violence appears to be dominated by the military line, often suppressing the moderate voices of the average population of Gaza.